Arthur brushed a sharp branch out of his hair as he followed Winsome through the familiar stretches of Elshire Forest. Winsome had teleported them only part of the way, leaving them to finish the journey on foot. The long walk irritated Arthur, and he couldn't help but think that the Elder could have made things easier by sending them directly to Elder Rinia's shelter. Yet Winsome had his reasons. He reminded Arthur that teleporting straight into the sanctuary would have disrupted the barrier that protected Arthur's family from danger. Reluctantly, Arthur admitted to himself that it was a wise precaution. The forest path stretched endlessly, and as they walked, Winsome pressed on with his lessons. His voice carried an unyielding weight as though every word he spoke demanded attention. He quizzed Arthur on the knowledge of Ephiodus and the Great Eight, making sure nothing slipped his grasp. Arthur recalled what had been drilled into him, that there were 8 races of Asuras in Ephiodus, each race made up of many clans. Only one clan from each race stood as part of the High Eight. Among them, the Vritra clan belonged to the Basilisk race. Arthur still found it hard to believe that the other clans had once tried to assassinate Agrona. To him, it seemed that a treaty should have been the natural solution, a path toward peace rather than conflict. But Winsome carried no such illusions. He revealed that Agrona had always been too dangerous for trust, too cunning and unpredictable to bind with agreements. The Asuras had never truly known his intentions on Alakria, nor the depth of his schemes. For that reason, they had agreed from the beginning that the only real solution was to eliminate him before his ambitions could take root. As the forest deepened around them, Arthur's thoughts drifted to Sylvia. Despite Winsome's lectures, confusion still weighed on him. He couldn't understand how she fit into the vast, tangled web of Asura politics, or why fate had led her to Dicathen of all places. The questions lingered in his chest, unresolved, as the two pressed on toward the hidden shelter of Elder Rinia. Winsome's tone grew grave as he finally revealed the weight of a secret known only to a select few within the Indrath clan. He told Arthur that long ago, Lady Sylvia had descended alongside the elite division of Asuras in an attempt to defeat Agrona. The revelation struck Arthur with disbelief and confusion. The very idea that Sylvia had been permitted to face such a mission seemed unthinkable to him. From what he had learned, none of them had known what awaited, only that Agrona was dangerous beyond measure. To Arthur, it sounded no different than a deliberate suicide, yet Winsome explained that Sylvia had not been allowed to go at all. She had concealed her presence, sneaking her way onto the squad unnoticed, and by the time she revealed herself, it had already been too late for her to return. How she was eventually captured, and why she chose to remain hidden even after escaping, remained a mystery that Winsome himself could not unravel. Arthur's mind raced, and his first instinct was to question what had become of the Asuras who had accompanied her. Winsome's expression hardened as he recounted what had transpired. Agrona had been prepared, far more than any of the leaders of Ephiodus could have expected. He had not only amassed a vast army of basilisks, but had also bred an overwhelming force from the lesser races of Alakria. These hybrids carried innate magical abilities that rivaled those of the Asuras. The Vritra clan, in their hunger for power, had interbred and experimented with the lesser races until tens of thousands of such creatures stood ready at Agrona's command. Arthur felt a jolt of horror course through him at the revelation. The thought of such abominations existing, birthed from cruel experiments, twisted his stomach. Winsome pressed on, his voice heavy with the memory of tragedy. The elite force of Ephiodus had been outnumbered beyond measure. Every Asura who had descended was either slain or captured in the battle. The loss had been catastrophic. Agrona himself had appeared before Lord Indrath to deliver the news that Sylvia had perished in combat. The grief and rage that consumed Lord Indrath had nearly plunged their world into annihilation. The great leader had been ready to launch a full-scale war against Agrona and the Vritra, caring nothing for the consequences. Yet the other clans intervened, urging restraint. They argued for a treaty instead, one that forbade the Asuras from acting directly. The reason was grim but clear: the devastation that would fall upon the world if the 7 Asura races of Ephiodus waged war against the Vritra would be catastrophic. Even then, the Asuras had demanded accountability from the Basilisk clans that still lived in Ephiodus. As Arthur absorbed the story, a sickened anger churned within him. He could not accept the idea of an entire race being punished for the sins of a few, no matter how vile their actions had been. To him, the very thought of experimenting on other beings in such a manner was monstrous, a crime against all life. He realized that the other clans of Ephiodus could have chosen the same path as the Vritra, creating abominations of power through interbreeding, yet their morals and their pride had restrained them from descending to such atrocities. Still, the reality weighed heavily on him. If Agrona had truly spent all those years hidden away on Alakria, then the numbers of the Vritra must have grown to dangerous levels. Combined with the already stark imbalance in power between Alakria and Dicathen, the situation seemed even more dire than he had feared. His mind then turned to the 6 ancient artifacts that Winsome had once entrusted to the people of Dicathen. Winsome had explained that these relics had been deliberately passed down, not as gifts but as tools meant to level the battlefield, to provide some semblance of balance against overwhelming odds. To Arthur, the implication was clear. He was a piece in this game, a carefully positioned figure on a chessboard, chosen to tip the scales of a war far larger than man himself. The realization stung. He could not ignore the gnawing thought that he had become nothing more than a pawn in the designs of the Asura clans. But Winsome had softened the truth in his own way. He told Arthur to think less of war and more of the people he wished to protect, reminding him that friends and family were the heart of his struggle. The words lingered in Arthur's chest, especially when Winsome asked whether he had thought of how to break the truth to his parents. That question carried a different kind of weight. Arthur had spent many nights behind prison walls reflecting on exactly that. As he walked past Winsome toward the faint flicker of firelight that illuminated the end of the tunnel, his heart beat faster. The warm glow cast shadows on the walls, silhouettes of people gathered around a fire. The scent of food drifted to him, rich and inviting, and it pulled a faint smile from his lips. He couldn't help but announce his arrival, his voice echoing through the tunnel. The reaction from his family was immediate and overwhelming. His father froze in shock, the dented pan in his hand slipping from his grasp and clattering loudly against the stone floor. His mother and sister leapt to their feet at the same time, their makeshift seats forgotten, as they rushed toward him. In an instant, Arthur was pulled into the warmth of his family's embrace. Yet Arthur noticed how his sister's attention had gone elsewhere. Ellie's gaze had locked firmly onto the small form of Sylvie, nestled against Arthur's chest in peaceful slumber. The sight made Arthur laugh hoarsely, though beneath the humor was the ache of how little time they had all shared together. Ellie's only response was a casual shrug, as if her brother's survival had never once been in question. To her, Arthur always returned alive, no matter the danger. The atmosphere in the cave suddenly shifted, heavy and oppressive, causing every member of Arthur's family to fall silent in an instant. Behind Arthur, soft footsteps echoed faintly, halting just within reach. Without hesitation, Arthur introduced the figure who had just arrived, the one who had aided him in escaping his imprisonment, and the one who now stood as his potential master. Winsome's presence radiated immense power, enough to draw confused and wary expressions from Arthur's family. When Arthur glanced back at him, Winsome wore a look of mild puzzlement, but recognition quickly replaced it as he understood the boy's subtle request to ease the pressure. With a slight acknowledgement, Winsome allowed his aura to fade, and the suffocating weight lifted from the cave, restoring the air to normal once more. At a distance, Elder Rhynia rose to her feet, offering Winsome a deep, respectful bow. Alice regarded Winsome with awe, her voice carrying heartfelt gratitude as she thanked the powerful mage who had saved her son. Her relief was evident in her eyes, though her maternal concern quickly shifted to Arthur himself. She asked about Winsome's role as his prospective teacher, curiosity sparking in her tone, but almost immediately dismissed her own question. Instead, she urged Arthur to focus on washing up and sharing a meal after his long and arduous journey. The family settled into the simple warmth of food and chatter. Arthur could feel the weight of his parents' anticipation. Both awaited the answer he had yet to give regarding Winsome and his future. When Arthur turned his eyes toward Winsome, he found the Asura watching him with the same quiet expectation. Gathering his composure, he asked Elder Rhynia for a moment alone with his parents. The diviner's warm smile and gentle nod granted him the privacy he sought. Inside the smaller chamber, Arthur's parents followed behind him, their confusion clear in their hesitant movements. His father, Reynold, glanced back toward the outside, almost expecting Winsome to join them, but when Arthur's solemn expression stopped him, he closed the flap and sat beside Alice. Alice's concern was palpable. She reached forward, her voice trembling slightly as she admitted her worry. Arthur admitted to himself that he had already put them through more than any son should, yet there was still a burden he had to share, something he had carried in silence ever since arriving in this world. Alice's confusion showed immediately. She tilted her head, her brows furrowed in disbelief as she tried to process the strange words her son had spoken. Arthur squeezed his mother's hand in return, grounding himself before continuing. He spoke with a calm certainty, recalling memories that no one else could ever claim. He told her that he remembered the exact moment of his birth, but unlike others, his consciousness had not begun there. Something extraordinary had happened. He had been transported, his soul reborn into this body. He explained that he had once belonged to another world, one far removed from Dicathen, and through some inexplicable phenomenon, he had been taken from it and placed into this life. His father, Reynold, tried to cut in with reason, urging Arthur to slow down, to explain more clearly what he meant by such a claim. But Alice's panic rose faster. She shook her head, searching his eyes with desperation, and in her disbelief she questioned his sanity. To her, the thought of another world was too wild, too far beyond reality. Fear and worry twisted her words as she leaned closer, examining her son's face, as though looking for an injury that could explain such delusion. Arthur quickly reassured her. Winsome knew nothing of this. No one did, not even the Asura outside. Only his parents were hearing it for the first time. He admitted that he did not know what to call this strange phenomenon himself, but after long contemplation, the word closest to it was reincarnation. Alice's hands trembled harder, and her fear only deepened. She demanded to know if something had been done to him during his imprisonment, her maternal instincts compelling her to believe that perhaps he had been harmed, perhaps twisted in some way. She reached for him, offering to heal whatever unseen damage might linger, but before she could act, Reynold placed a steady hand on her arm. His voice carried quiet authority as he urged her to let Arthur Arthur speak. Arthur took that chance to explain everything. He told them about the world he had come from, a place so different and yet so real in his memory. He described the role he had once held, the responsibilities he had carried, the struggles and the choices that had defined his past life. He spoke of the people he had known, the relationships he had forged, and the countless details that could not have been fabricated. Through it all, Reynolds remained silent for the most part, though every so often he interjected with short, probing questions. Alice, however, could not hide her emotions. Her face grew pale as the truth unfolded before her lips quivering as tears threatened to form. Arthur's confession left him drained. His father ran a hand through his hair, muttering to himself, trying to grasp what he had just heard. The mention of Arthur's fighting ability and his strange grasp of magic only deepened his confusion. Arthur confirmed that the system of ki from his past life mirrored aspects of mana here, and that his memories stretched back to the moment of his birth. His father's expression grew heavy, but before the silence could settle, his mother began to laugh. Both Arthur and his father turned toward her, only to find her laughter carrying a strange edge, as if it came from denial rather than amusement. She clung to the belief that this was all a cruel joke, waiting for reassurance. Yet, as no such comfort came, her laughter withered into fear. The truth was too much for her to bear. Her son claiming to be someone else, a former king reborn inside her child. Her trembling hands reached desperately for her husband's arm, pleading for him to deny it, to call their son sick rather than accept such an impossible reality. Reynolds pulled her close, holding her as she wept. His weary eyes lifted to Arthur, silently asking him to leave them in peace. Without a word, Arthur stepped outside. The night air met him with quiet stillness. Elder Rhynia, Winsome, and Ellie lifted their gazes as he sat down among them, but no words passed between them. Time crept forward, each second weighed down with doubt, until his father finally emerged. He asked Ellie to stay with her mother inside the tent, then gestured for Arthur to follow. Before leaving, Ellie skipped toward him, a bright artifact glowing faintly in her hands. She handed him his bond with playful cheer, sticking her tongue out in the way only a younger sibling could. For the first time that night, a faint smile tugged at his lips, but as she turned to go, Ellie paused. She hesitated only a moment before rushing back and wrapping her arms tightly around him. The warmth of her embrace cut through the heaviness in his chest, and Arthur realized she was the one comforting him now. Arthur followed his father into the tunnel he and Winsome had once used. Reynolds' voice was quiet, burdened with emotion, as he explained that Alice was resting, still shaken by everything that had unfolded. Arthur's chest tightened with worry, his thoughts consumed by his mother's fragile state. Reynolds studied his son, the weight of disbelief heavy on his face. He acknowledged that there was no reason for Arthur to lie about something so cruel, and slowly the pieces began to fit together in his mind. Arthur's early awakening, his unnatural brilliance as both a fighter and a mage. Suddenly, everything seemed to make sense. Yet even with this clarity, the truth was far from easy to accept. Arthur's eyes remained fixed on his father, searching for a trace of stability, but what he saw instead was a storm of emotions. Reynolds' composure cracked as he admitted how unbearable this truth felt. The memories of their family together now seemed tainted. Were they real, or simply an illusion of what Arthur believed they wanted in a son? His voice trembled with anguish as he questioned how he was supposed to act around the boy who was, in reality, older than himself. The thought of Alice, who had nurtured Arthur from birth, believing she had been raising her own child, only deepened his torment. Arthur could not answer. Every word Reynolds spoke carried truth, and silence was the only response he could muster. The frustration within Reynolds erupted physically as his fist struck the wall, the force splitting his skin until blood dripped down his hand. His gaze fell back to Arthur, eyes sharp with doubt, as he asked the question he had been unable to restrain. Was Arthur truly their son, or had he stolen the life of the unborn child that should have been theirs? The words escaped before Reynolds could stop them, and immediately his expression collapsed into regret. His hand rose to cover his mouth, shame flickering in his eyes. He stammered, his tone breaking, before whispering an apology. He confessed his confusion, torn apart by emotions too vast to contain. Arthur finally broke his silence. His voice was steady yet heavy, carrying both guilt and sorrow. He admitted that he had no true answers, that perhaps he had indeed replaced the baby that was meant to be their son. He explained that he never truly understood the process that had brought him here, but he could no longer hide the truth from them. Yet in revealing it, he questioned whether he had made the right choice at all. He confessed how long he had wanted to tell them, but his courage had always failed him, and now, with everything laid bare, he revealed that he had chosen this moment to speak before leaving. Reynolds' eyes widened in shock at the word. Leaving? His heart twisted at the thought. Arthur's expression was firm. He explained that under the current circumstances, distance would be best, for both him and his family. Reynolds' eyes lingered on the ground as he asked how long Arthur would be gone. When Arthur answered that it would be at least a few years, his father gave no sign of stopping him. There was no anger, no command to stay, only a heavy silence. Arthur turned, his chest aching and his head pounding harder than ever before. For all their potential, humans remained painfully fragile. He thought back to his old world, where family had been nothing more than an empty word. Growing up without love, he had become callous, distant, and unmatched in combat, but a hollow, broken person inside. This world had changed that. His parents, and later Ellie, had given him something he had never known: unconditional love. They had shaped him into someone better, not merely a stronger fighter or mage, but a better man. Quietly, he apologized in his heart for the hurt he had caused them and thanked them for making him their son. With those thoughts, he walked away, not daring to look back, even as he heard the muffled sobs of his father behind him. Holding back his own tears became its own battle. When he returned to the main cave, Winsome and Rhynia were already engaged in quiet discussion. Winsome acknowledged Arthur's arrival, asking if he was ready, and Arthur confirmed without hesitation, but Rhynia stopped him, asking if he wasn't going to say goodbye to his family. Arthur dismissed the need, saying everything had already been resolved and entrusted them to her care. He bowed curtly and turned to leave, but Rhynia caught his arm. Her voice trembled with urgency as she told him that his expression was frightening, unbecoming of someone as kind-hearted as he was. She acknowledged the gravity of the battles ahead, yet pleaded with him not to fall back into the old darkness he once carried. She warned him that the deeper he descended into that pit, the harder it would be to return. Then, with resolve, she promised to take care of things in his absence and urged him to go. As Rhynia spoke, Winsome retrieved a large disc-like artifact and set it on the ground. A drop of his blood activated it, causing the disc to expand and release a column of radiant light that reached the cave ceiling. Arthur's mind lingered on Rhynia's warning as he turned to Winsome, uncertain whether the weight of his expression had betrayed him. Winsome regarded him calmly, remarking that Arthur's face reminded him of the Pantheon Asuras of Epheotis, warriors renowned for closing off their emotions to fight with unflinching precision. Winsome explained that it was a useful skill, but not without its own cost. He pressed Arthur once more, asking if every loose end here had truly been tied, for once they stepped into Epheotis, his full concentration would be required. Arthur looked around the cave one final time, his eyes sweeping across the remnants of his home, his family, and the fragile bonds he was leaving behind. With a deep breath, he held Sylvie tightly against his chest, whispering his silent resolve. He was ready. Without hesitation, he stepped into the column of golden light beside Winsome, letting its brilliance consume him. Far behind, Reynold was left drowning in the storm of his own thoughts. He hated himself for what had happened. A part of him longed to reassure Arthur, to tell him that no matter what truths had been revealed, he was still their son, still family. But another part of him, the darker, more selfish part, wished Arthur had never spoken at all. That way he could have kept believing in the illusion, unshaken by impossible truths. He admitted silently that he had always known Arthur was different. Perhaps it was his own pride that made the truth so unbearable, the fragile hope that he might have raised a once-in-a-millennium genius. The signs had always been there: the boy's strange behavior from an early age, his inexplicable mastery of the sword, and his unmatched aptitude as a mage. Reynold dragged his weary feet back to the cave, burdened by guilt and pride alike. By the fire, he found Elder Rhynia, her frail hands cradling something softly. The elf's voice carried with it the weight of inevitability. She told him that Arthur had already left. Reynold sighed heavily, his tone more that of a chastised child than a father, admitting he had expected as much. Rhynia confessed she had long dreaded this day, the day Arthur revealed the truth to his parents. Startled, Reynold asked if she had known. With tired eyes, Rhynia explained that while she saw many things, Arthur was the one person who forced her to strain even her own sight, piecing together fragments of what lay ahead for him. Reynold scoffed bitterly, muttering that Arthur was hardly a boy anymore, but Rhynia dismissed the thought with a sharp retort, claiming that to her, he was still a child, just as Reynold himself was still a child in her eyes. She reflected with wry amusement on the misconceptions surrounding age and intelligence, how the old were expected to be wise, and the intelligent expected to be logical. Paired together, one would assume such a person would become a cold and calculating figure. With a piercing gaze, she asked Reynold if he saw her that way. He stammered, denying it nervously, though he admitted he did not see how this related to Arthur. Rhynia's expression hardened as she struck at the truth he feared. Had he not wished that Arthur had kept silent? Had he not thought ignorance would have been easier? Had he not wondered why Arthur told him in the first place? She explained that the heart was always the brain's fiercest opponent, constantly clashing against reason, efficiency, and logic. That conflict brought pain, even death, and yet humans could never separate themselves from it. Emotions might weaken an individual, but they were also what bound people together, making them stronger as a whole. Reynold tried to make sense of the situation, wondering if Arthur had acted more on raw emotion than calculated logic when he had spoken to them earlier. Elder Rhynia, however, brushed off the thought with her usual sharpness. She reminded him that no one could truly know what Arthur was thinking, but she reflected on how far the boy had come. Having known him since his earliest days as a toddler in this world, she believed this choice might have been the decisive step that finally shattered the cold shell in which Arthur had once sought safety and comfort. With effort, Elder Rhynia rose, her movements heavy with age, and painfully stretched before handing Reynold the bundle of sheets she had been holding so carefully. She explained that Arthur's master had sent it as a gift for the Leywin family. Curious, Reynold peeled back the blankets, only for his breath to catch in surprise. surprise. Nestled inside was not just any object, it was an infant manhwa beast, small and fragile. The discovery startled his daughter Ellie, whose delighted voice rang out as she rushed forward. She squealed at the sight of the tiny creature, begging to keep it. Her sudden exclamation made her mother flinch, but before Reynolds could raise doubts, the young manhwa beast stirred awake. Its eyes locked with Ellie's, and Reynolds' hesitation faltered as the bond between child and creature formed in an instant. Inside, Reynolds sighed with resignation. He had once dreamed of riding into battle atop a mighty manhwa beast, yet that vision crumbled as he watched his daughter cradle the infant in her arms. Still, the thought warmed him. Perhaps it was better for his precious child to form such a bond, one that could protect her far more than his fantasies ever could. Ellie giggled happily as she held the creature close, announcing that she would name it Boo. The name left Reynolds momentarily stunned. To him, it was impossible to reconcile such a fierce beast's potential with such a soft and innocent name. Yet Ellie explained her reasoning with the simple, bright logic of a child, pointing out that the dark spots on the beast's fur made it look perpetually angry. Satisfied, she skipped away with Boo in her arms, but paused suddenly, remembering something important. Turning back, she informed her father that her mother had woken up. Reynolds' heart lightened at the news. Rising quickly, he hurried toward the tent and felt warmth flood him as he entered, smiling at the sight of his wife sitting upright once more. Alice stirred weakly, her voice hoarse as she asked how long she had been asleep. Reynolds wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close so that her head could rest against his shoulder. He told her it had only been a few hours. Her next words cut sharper than he was ready for. She asked after Arthur, whether he was gone, and when Reynolds confirmed it, her body began to tremble in his arms. She asked then if she was a terrible person, her voice breaking with guilt. Reynolds quickly reassured her, though confusion flickered inside him. She explained through tears that she had called Arthur sick, that she hadn't wanted to take his confession seriously. Her gaze lifted to him, shimmering with anguish as she questioned again. Was she a terrible person for doubting whether Arthur was truly their son? Reynolds faltered, the words he wanted to give her, "No, you're not," stuck in his throat because the same doubts had plagued him too. He had already condemned himself for them, but Alice's pain was sharper still. She had carried Arthur for 9 months, suffered the strain of pregnancy and the torment of labor. She had nursed him, soothed him through sickness, and taught him the ways of the world. Now all of that love and certainty had been shaken, rewritten by the truth their son had confessed. Reynolds' lip quivered as he fought to swallow his own turmoil. He could not break down. He had to be the strength Alice needed to lean on. He told her gently that she had nothing to be sorry for, that they only needed time to sort out their feelings. Arthur had understood that much, which was why he had confessed before leaving. When Alice asked how long he would be gone, Reynolds admitted it would be for a few years. He had expected disbelief or protest, but instead Alice only nodded slightly. Her voice clipped as she murmured that she understood. Concern rising, Reynolds held her at arm's length, searching her expression. That was when she whispered the thought that shook him. She wondered what their son might have been like if Arthur had never taken over. Reynolds' breath caught. He begged her not to speak such things, but Alice pressed on, her tears flowing freely as she imagined the child that might have been. Would he have been courageous and outgoing like his father, or careful and shy like his mother? Her voice cracked, and Reynolds could no longer stop his own tears from falling. He pleaded with her to stop, to not unravel herself like this, clinging to the one truth he could manage to voice. Arthur was Arthur. But Alice cut him off, her eyes desperate and searching as she asked the question outright. Arthur was what? Their son. She reminded him with bitter clarity that not once since the beginning of their conversation had either of them referred to Arthur as such. Reynolds admitted that at this moment, just as it was for Alice, he too struggled to confidently call Arthur their son, yet he hoped that feeling would change the next time they saw him. Still, it did not erase the truth, that for over 13 years, they had embraced Arthur as family. Together they had laughed, fought, celebrated, and shed tears. What had drawn them close had never been the blood in their veins nor the lives they once lived, but the hardships and joys they endured side by side. Reynolds reminded Alice of the moment Arthur had sacrificed his life for her during their journey to Xyrus, an act he would never have chosen had he not truly cared. Reynolds assured her that she was not a horrible person, only that it would take time for them both to fully come to terms with everything. Alice's gaze lingered on him, her swollen eyes brimming with tears, and she croaked weakly that she must look terrible. Reynolds, seeing her face flushed and her nose red from crying, only felt her beauty more deeply in that fragile moment. He leaned forward, intending to seal his comfort with a tender kiss, when Ellie's cheerful voice suddenly broke through from outside the tent. She called out to her mother, asking if she felt better and insisting she come see someone or something she called Boo. Confused, Alice questioned the meaning of Ellie's words. Reynolds, still wearing the traces of his swollen eyes, gave her a reassuring wink and promised he would explain later. Gently wiping away another tear from her cheek, he leaned in once more, determined to continue the intimate moment they had shared. Arthur had not known what to expect when entering the realm of beings his kind had always regarded as gods. In his imagination, such a place had always been painted with brilliance, gold, diamonds, and rare jewels adorning every corner. Yet the reality that greeted him was both humbling and overwhelming. In his old world, even the homes of the most influential leaders had been built with practicality in mind. The greatest figures had been warriors whose needs were simple and unadorned. Here, however, when Arthur emerged from the golden column of light, the sight that unfolded before him stole his breath away. Wide-eyed, he stood in awe of a land that felt too ethereal for mortals. The realm of the Asuras spread before him, and Arthur's heart whispered the unspoken truth. This was the land of deities, magnificent beyond measure. His young eyes roamed the splendor, tracing the shimmering bridge carved from precious minerals, a sight so rare that mortal kings would have waged wars to claim it. Winsome walked ahead with composed authority, his steps firm as he moved toward the grand castle. The Asura spoke with solemn weight, revealing that this was Epheotis, and more precisely, the domain of the Indrath clan. The words struck Arthur with realization. It was Sylvia's family, the very bloodline tied to the dragon that had changed his life. Winsome's tone carried respect as he explained that Lord Indrath himself had commanded Arthur and Sylvie's presence. Arthur's gaze lifted toward the towering doors of the castle, so massive they seemed built not for men, but for giants and dragons alike. Their sheer scale made him feel smaller than he had in years. His curiosity lingered on the absence of visible guards, but Winsome clarified that unseen eyes had been upon them since they stepped onto the bridge. The reassurance only made the unseen presence more imposing. With every step deeper into the realm, the tension around Winsome grew more evident. The Ashura adjusted the folds of his attire repeatedly, a rare sign of unease for someone of his stature. As they neared the next set of doors, Arthur finally caught sight of two guards standing vigil, the first visible protectors of this divine stronghold. The female guard greeted Elder Winsome with a grin as she acknowledged his arrival with the human boy. The male guard's gaze, however, lingered critically on Sylvie, then shifted to Arthur, his eyes filled with disapproval as he judged whether it was proper for a mere human child to carry the princess. Winsome dismissed the concern with little patience, reminding them of the bond that tied Arthur and Sylvie together. Before pressing for entry, the guards exchanged a brief silent look before granting passage. With a heavy clack, the massive doors swung open to reveal the great hall. At its center sat a man upon a throne, wreathed in shimmering white fire, his youthful appearance belying the weight of authority that radiated from him. Without hesitation, Winsome stepped forward, kneeling with deep reverence before the figure. The Asura lowered his head and addressed the man as his lord. Arthur, watching closely, realized that this was Lord Indrath, and his presence was far from what Arthur had imagined. Suddenly, a searing pain ignited in Arthur's chest and arm, forcing him to grit his teeth against the burn. Then, in the blink of an eye, Sylvie vanished from Arthur's side and appeared cradled effortlessly in Lord Indrath's arms. The abruptness left Arthur stunned, his body frozen in bewilderment. Lord Indrath held Sylvie with ease, his tone laced with sharp authority as he reminded Arthur of his right to hold his granddaughter. His gaze darkened as he appraised Sylvie's condition, deeming her mana reserves insultingly weak and her hibernation proof of strain under Arthur's care. The weight of his piercing eyes bore into Arthur, leaving him defenseless under the judgment. To Arthur's surprise, Winsome intervened, bowing his head in apology and taking the blame upon himself for failing to guide Sylvie's training in Dicathen. He offered to begin her instruction immediately, should it please his lord. But Lord Indrath dismissed the suggestion with finality, declaring that he would personally oversee Sylvie's care. He placed a finger gently against her brow, his lips moving in an inaudible incantation. His eyes glowed with power, and in an instant, Sylvie stirred awake. Her eyes opened, now alight with the same radiant purple hue as her grandfather's, the bond between them undeniable. Sylvie stirred weakly, her small voice reaching Arthur as she asked where she was. Arthur reassured her with a smile, explaining that they had traveled some distance. Her eyes, heavy with exhaustion, fluttered before she admitted to feeling sleepy and asked if she could return to rest. Arthur nodded gently, granting her comfort. With Sylvie safe for the moment, Arthur turned his attention to Lord Indrath. He recalled how Elder Winsome had already explained what was required of him, but the reason for being brought to the land of deities remained unclear. If this had been merely for training, then any remote dungeon within Dicathen could have sufficed. Why summon him to Epheotis itself? Lord Indrath regarded him with a calculating gaze, stating that Arthur was a necessary piece in the struggle against Agrona and his growing army. The benefit of victory, Indrath explained, was mutual. To prepare him, several specialists would be assigned to aid Winsome in his training, an honor reserved only for the most gifted of the younger generation. Arthur pressed further, questioning how they would know when the war approached and how much time remained. Indrath dismissed such concerns as his own burden to carry, instructing Arthur to focus solely on his training. Winsome would be notified when it was time for Arthur to return to his homeland. With that, the Asura signaled for Winsome to escort him away. Arthur's concern, however, fell on Sylvie. Indrath declared without hesitation that she would remain behind until her her own training was complete. The thought of being separated from her for an unknown length of time made Arthur bristle with protest, but Indrath's patience wore thin. With a twitch of his brow, he waved them away dismissively. Before Arthur could say more, Winsome tightened his grip on his arm, pulling him from the great hall. Frustration burned within Arthur. He had endured the meeting only to have Sylvie taken from him and to feel the contempt of the Indrath clan pressing down on him. It was humiliating. Winsome, however, met his anger with a weary sigh. He explained that Arthur's relationship with the Asuras was one of grudging tolerance. To them, relying on a lesser being was an insult to their pride, yet neither Arthur nor Sylvie would be mistreated. They were too important. Arthur scoffed at the phrasing, recalling how Indrath had referred to him as a mere necessary component. Winsome's lips curved faintly at that, as if amused, before urging him onward. Their path once again led them across the glowing iridescent bridge, where Winsome revealed that there were others Arthur needed to meet. Arthur recalled how Lord Indrath once described him as a necessary piece in the war, though to him, it all felt the same. His thoughts were cut short when Winsome suddenly grabbed his hand and declared their arrival. Arthur, surprised and frustrated, wondered if they had really walked for hours only to train in such a place. But before he could question further, Winsome instructed him to hold tightly. In the next instant, Arthur was hurled toward a tree. His eyes widened as his body was absorbed into the bark, pulled deeper with each passing second as though being pushed into another realm entirely. His knees buckled when he finally landed, realizing he had been transported into a vast cavern. Winsome followed behind him, composed as ever. From the shadows emerged a bald man who greeted Winsome warmly. This was Cordry, a member of the Thyestes clan of the Pantheon Asura race, the same lineage as Aldir. Winsome introduced Arthur to his old friend, and though Arthur stammered awkwardly, he managed to return the greeting. Cordry's sharp gaze shifted to Winsome, questioning whether Lord Indrath had truly entrusted him with the ether orb. Winsome revealed the translucent orb in his hand, confirming it. Cordry remarked on how heavily Indrath seemed to be investing in this human. Arthur, confused, demanded to know what the orb truly was. Cordry explained that the ether orb would serve as the cornerstone of his training. Through it, they would harness the dragon race's ability to manipulate ether, the primal energy that coursed through and governed the universe. The orb would allow them to separate body from soul and even bend the flow of time itself. Arthur struggled to process such overwhelming revelations, but Winsome continued without pause. He revealed that Indrath had also granted access to his exclusive training grounds. Within the cave lay a pond filled with ether-rich liquid, capable of accelerating progress and healing wounds Arthur would inevitably suffer during this brutal training. As the water stirred around him, Arthur could barely comprehend the scale of what was unfolding. Winsome's smirk carried both pride and warning. Arthur was about to witness it all firsthand. Arthur's mind wandered back to the institution of his previous life, where each day had been consumed by endless cycles of discipline and pain. 8 hours of combat training had been followed by 10 more of meditation to nurture the key centers. Even then, the structure had been flawed. The instructors had taught nothing but the vital points of the human body, hammering in brutish and senseless methods of inflicting damage. Yet Arthur, desperate for progress, had followed the regimen to the letter. He had attended every lesson, endured every failure, and spent countless hours being defeated by his classmates before his Kai Center had even cultivated. Those memories, buried deep, surfaced with startling clarity now, drawn out by the similarity of his current struggle. The haunting recollections arose as his body gave way under the devastating force of a low sweep. The simple strike shattered both of his legs at once, and Arthur collapsed, helpless. Before he could recover, another sharp jab dislocated his right shoulder. Pain seared through him, leaving him defenseless. His blurred gaze fell upon the sight of his own severed arm, gripped casually in the hand of the opponent who had dismantled him so easily. Arthur recalled Winsome's warning that the pain here would be greatly dulled within the domain. If this torment was what diminished agony felt like, he shuddered to imagine the unbearable suffering of those same wounds in reality. The man responsible for his ruin stood over him, his expression unreadable, his presence absolute. With a short nod, he lifted his hand and snapped his fingers. In that instant, the battle ended. The world bled into darkness. Arthur jolted awake, whole again. His body restored, trembled under the memory of the wounds. He collapsed to all fours, his stomach revolting until he emptied what remained of his last meal. Harsh gasps tore from his throat as he struggled to steady himself. His body was drenched, though he could not tell if the wetness came from the magical liquid around him or from the sweat pouring out of him under such unbearable strain. Even through the haze of exhaustion, a fire burned inside him. Gritting his teeth, Arthur forced words out between broken breaths. Determined not to yield, he demanded to continue. Cordry acknowledged Arthur's remarkable willpower, comparing the passage of time between the soul realm and the physical world. While only 5 minutes had passed outside, nearly an hour had slipped away within. Winsome reminded Arthur that every time he was expelled from the soul realm, precious moments of training were lost. Even with time slowed, his progress toward preparing for war would be hindered if he continued to be forced out so often. Arthur, bitter from the endless cycle, blamed his struggles heels on Cordry, who relentlessly cut him down every few minutes. Yet Cordry calmly explained that he was only pushing Arthur to the limits of what he could endure. Even young Asuras, who did not face death as frequently, struggled to withstand the mental strain. For a mere human, Arthur was coping with the sensation of dying far better than expected. His sarcastic response did little to change the Asura's resolve. With the silent exchange, Cordry and Winsome resumed the training. Once again, the sapphire liquid rose, encasing Arthur and Cordry, and he was swallowed by the now familiar burning agony of entering the soul realm. It had been over a week since this torment, what Winsome politely called training, had begun, all within Lord Indrath's exclusive grounds. From the start, Arthur had been forced to fight Cordry in his soul state. The presence of the ether orb dulled the pain of death, though it still left him dreading how unbearable such agony would be in the physical realm. Between the cycles of training, eating, sleeping, and recovering from repeated deaths, several months had already slipped by in that endless grassland under Cordry's watchful eye. The first time Arthur had entered the soul realm, he had been killed instantly, unable to even perceive Cordry's opening strike. Though Cordry's attack patterns never varied, Arthur, after weeks, could barely manage to avoid them. The gap in power between them was staggering, and even Cordry's gentle encouragement to trust in his body did little to ease the frustration of his failures. No matter how long Arthur lasted, Cordry would eventually strike him down. Weeks of relentless training had gone by, yet not once had Arthur landed a single blow. Every strike of his blade, every desperate punch, meant nothing but empty air. The Asura's movements were impossibly fast, his attacks sharp and precise, his dodges effortless, as if Arthur's efforts were mere child's play. Cordry pressed him without mercy, reminding him to remain patient, to hold his ground, to bide his time for the opening that never came. Arthur braced for a knee to his stomach, but instead Cordry shifted mid-motion, spinning into a brutal roundhouse kick. Arthur couldn't evade it, but he managed to keep himself from being killed outright. The blow crashed into his jaw, the world shattering into a whirl of pain as his body skipped across the ground like a stone over water before finally collapsing in the tall grass. The Asura smirked at his fallen student, acknowledging his small victory and survival. Arthur, jaw aching but spirit unbroken, responded with a crude gesture, his defiance as sharp as ever. Already his body, or rather his soul state, began repairing itself. The sharp pain dulled as broken bones knit back together, fragments reattaching with unnatural speed. The regeneration was relentless, a reminder that this training ground would not let him stay broken for long, but Cordry's expression grew serious. He declared that they would pause combat training, though not out of disappointment. Arthur had feared he wasn't learning fast enough, but his mentor dismissed the thought entirely. His progress, in fact, was terrifying. His ability to comprehend and adapt, paired with his unyielding stubbornness, marked him as someone whose potential far surpassed the rest. And yet, that same stubbornness posed a danger. It wasn't Arthur's body Cordry was worried about. It was his mind. Death in this realm was no longer final, but that made it worse. Each repeated death had become a precursor to pain so profound that even Asuras would hesitate to endure it. Such constant trauma, Cordry warned, risked breaking Arthur in ways no regeneration could mend. The body would eventually resist, instinctively protecting itself against the very experiences Arthur sought to embrace. Too much pain, and he would shatter. But harnessed in moderation, pain itself would become his greatest weapon, his sharpest shield. Arthur considered Cordry's earlier words for a moment, weighing them carefully. Deep inside, he felt that he could withstand whatever was to come, and with that conviction, he attempted to brush aside his mentor's concern. Yet before his thoughts could even take proper shape, a suffocating wave of dread crushed down on him like an unstoppable tide. In the blink of an eye, the world shifted. His body was already thrown several yards away, without his mind even grasping how it happened. A sharp, searing pain ripped through Arthur's body. Looking down in shock, he saw his mentor's hand piercing clean through his chest. His strength faltered instantly, and as he tried in vain to pull himself away, his body collapsed under its own weight. Cordry withdrew his hand with calm precision before kneeling down so his eyes met Arthur's weakened gaze. A gentle smile softened the harshness of the moment. The Asura's demeanor radiated patience as he reminded Arthur that even the gods themselves could not define what sort of life one truly lived. Every past experience shaped the outcome before him, and in Arthur's case, it had led to this loss. Cordry made it clear that Arthur's instinct, though powerful, had become a crutch, something leaned on too heavily at the expense of all else. What Arthur needed now were small steps forward, the willingness not only to learn, but also to unlearn. As his mentor ruffled his hair with unexpected tenderness, Arthur's mind drifted back to his previous life. He remembered the orphanage, the endless days where he scavenged scraps of knowledge and tools to forge his own path, teaching himself because no one else would. His body trembled now, but he could not be sure of the reason. Perhaps it was from the gaping wound in his chest, perhaps from the exhilaration of training under mentors of such caliber, or perhaps from the looming shadow of the war they all prepared to face. In truth, he realized it was a mixture of all three. More than a month had passed in the outside world, which meant nearly a year had gone by inside this training realm. Cordry stood before Arthur like a monster. No, like a true predator. The moment he unleashed the restraints he had placed on himself for Arthur's safety, the suffocating pressure that erupted from him reminded Arthur of just how terrifying his master truly was. Cordry advanced, his presence alone promising destruction, as if warning Arthur that he was coming for him and that he needed to be ready. Rage and determination welled up within Arthur, spilling out in a primal roar as he charged forward. His teal blade, Dawn's Ballad, flared weakly in his grip as he closed the distance, aiming to end the clash in one decisive strike. Yet his hopes were shattered in an instant. Cordry intercepted the attack effortlessly, parrying the mighty weapon as if it were nothing more than a child's toy. Arthur's blade cut through empty air, grazing harmlessly past Cordry's face, close enough to brush the edge of his ear. The instructor's calm gaze held no fear. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement, as though he had taken notice of Arthur's improved movements despite the heavy suppression of his aura. Arthur knew that acknowledgement wasn't true praise, merely recognition of progress, nothing more. Every breath grew heavier as the crushing atmosphere pressed down on him. His body screamed at its limit, lungs desperate for oxygen, yet the invisible weight suffocated him. With a final surge of desperation, Arthur lunged again, pouring every ounce of strength into his strike. But the effort proved futile. Dawn's Ballad slipped from his trembling hands, clattering against the ground, and his legs collapsed beneath him. Gasping and choking for air, Arthur fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the hellish oppression. Then, just as suddenly, Cordry's suffocating aura receded. The unbearable pressure lifted, and Arthur's lungs clawed at the air in greedy gulps. Barely able to speak between ragged breaths, Arthur forced out a question, desperate to know how long he had lasted under the crushing weight of the king's force. Cordry, unshaken as always, offered a curt but honest reply that he was improving. Arthur acknowledged that his training time had not been long, yet he felt the weight of every second. Cordry, however, did not allow him to linger on the thought. The instructor insisted that weapons be set aside for now, despite knowing Arthur's preference for sword fighting and his deep connection with Dawn's Ballad. As a mage, Cordry emphasized hand-to-hand combat was the most versatile and adaptive form of fighting. He pressed upon Arthur the need to mold his bones, strengthen his muscles, and sharpen his mind to their limits so that he could stand as the knight who would protect both his continent and the people he loved. Arthur's training in melee combat had already been impressive, yet his fighting style leaned too much towards single duels. Cordry warned that the coming war would not offer such clean battles. With the Asuras forbidden from partaking, it would be their mixed blood descendants who would make up the enemy's strongest forces. Arthur would have to expect situations where he would be surrounded by enemies carrying Asuran blood. The restriction placed upon his mana was not a limitation but a tool, forcing him to refine his precision. In the end, Cordry believed that physical combat, sharpened with exact mana control, would prove to be the most efficient and dependable way to strike down enemies. Arthur accepted these truths, his resolve firm. Cordry reminded him of the lessons that had brought him this far, the first being survival, learning to fight and dodge at greater speeds. Then came the trials of combat under crushing pressure, fighting beneath the oppressive weight of Cordry's king's force, what Arthur called killing intent. Months of enduring this trial had tempered him, strengthening his tolerance and focus, but Cordry now declared the third field of focus. Arthur's vision was too narrow, too fixated on a single point, as if to prove his words. His body moved instinctively as he rolled his fist back, unleashing a flurry of punches without drawing on mana. Even without magical reinforcement, the strike carried surprising force, enough to make Cordry himself take note. Cordry's movements were fluid and precise, effortlessly dodging Arthur's punch. He acknowledged the force behind the strike, pointing out that while power was admirable, true mastery lay in sustaining such strength over prolonged battles. He reminded Arthur that mana was merely a tool, like a sword, and the body was the true foundation that brought all tools together to form a warrior. In a single liquid motion, Cordry pivoted, seizing Arthur's attacking arm and redirecting the blow with ease. His lesson continued as he demonstrated that the body itself could serve as weaponry, hands like blades, legs like axes, and even as cannons capable of devastating impact. Allowing Arthur to defend himself with mana, Cordry pressed his palm against Arthur's back. Arthur quickly cloaked his body in a tight layer of mana, concentrating his defenses at the point of contact. A sudden explosion followed, shattering the sound barrier. The impact sent Arthur hurtling through the air like a bullet, his vision darkening as pain surged through him. The force tore him from the soul realm, leaving his body limp and disoriented. When his eyes opened again, Arthur found himself in the familiar cave, soaked in both the strange liquid and his own sweat. Cordry stood before him, his sternness softened with sympathy before his attention shifted elsewhere. Arthur turned, noticing Winsome nearby, and beyond him, a small figure emerged. It was a boy, no older than 7, who bowed with a show of discipline. He introduced himself as Tachi, apologizing for his lateness. To Arthur's surprise, Cordry declared this child to be his new training partner. The boy, however, was visibly displeased. Expecting individual instruction, he protested with frustration, questioning the value of sparring alongside Arthur. Cordry's tone was sharp as steel when he addressed the boy. Arthur had received special training under his hand, and the honor of sparring within the ether orb was not something to be squandered with complaints. To grumble about training alongside a human was beneath one who bore the name of Thyestes. Tachi lowered his head, though not without resistance. He argued that his master's time would be better spent on the many eager pupils of their clan, rather than wasted on a mere human. Cordry ignored the insult and instead turned his gaze back to Arthur. He explained that while every member of the Pantheon race wielded Force-type mana in their own unique way, the Thyestes had mastered the art of turning an enemy's strength against them. By perceiving weight, momentum, and balance, they redirected attacks with the barest effort, conserving their own strength until it was needed for a decisive strike. Cordry had only shown Arthur glimpses of this method, but now it would be drilled into him through combat against Tachi. Arthur was forbidden from using mana. His task was to block, deflect, and throw. Tachi, by contrast, was to hold nothing back. Death, as always in this realm, was not to be feared. Tachi's protest rang with indignation. Shouldn't the restrictions be placed on him rather than on the human? But Cordry's glare silenced him. To doubt his master's judgment was unthinkable. And so, reluctantly, the boy prepared. Though only 7 years of age, Tachi's talent was already remarkable, enough to have drawn the eye of the clan elders themselves. His movements were sharp, disciplined, and efficient, the product of a prodigy's careful shaping. Yet as the days stretched into weeks, something unexpected began to unfold. Even under the crushing weight of restrictions, Arthur adapted. His steps became lighter, his shifts more precise, his movements stripped of waste until they were honed to instinctive efficiency. Slowly, impossibly, he began to keep up. Cordry observed with a growing sense of disbelief. This was not merely discipline or raw strength, it was perception, sharpened to an uncanny degree. How many battles had this boy endured in his brief life to develop such awareness? In all his years as a warrior and mentor, Cordry had guided countless pupils who had risen to prominence within the Thyestes clan, yet none had stirred in him what Arthur did now. Emotions he had never felt, not even toward himself, welled within him as he watched the human boy grow sharper with every spar. What Arthur could become was beyond imagining, and the longing to see it realized was almost intoxicating. Had he been born an Asura, Arthur would have stood among the highest of their echelons, his place assured among the great. Yet the gods, in their caprice, had positioned him instead as a mere pawn, destined to be used until discarded. Such brilliance, shackled to tragedy, such potential, wasted by fate. A pity, a profound pity. Arthur reacted with precision as Cordry's instructions echoed in his mind. The enemy's punch came overextended, and instead of dodging, Arthur ducked low, slipping beneath the strike and moving in close. A high kick followed, but the opponent's leg was unsteady and off balance, an opening Arthur wasted no time in exploiting. When the left hook came too early, Arthur tilted his head back just enough to let it graze past. The next strike dragged with sluggishness, slow enough for him to parry, seize the opponent's palm, and twist sharply. Another sweep cut toward his legs, but Arthur resisted the instinct to leap away. He remembered the trap that would follow. Instead, he pressed forward, sliding into the arc of the kick where its strength faltered. Danger stirred at his back, yet Arthur did not glance behind. The shifting of shadows was enough to guide him. He countered without hesitation. One strike swung toward his face, another toward his ribs, an increasingly synchronized effort from his opponents. Arthur lowered his body, letting the head strike sail overhead while his arm braced against the kick to his ribs. He redirected its momentum, pushing himself free of the suffocating disadvantage he had been cornered into. The clash halted as Cordry's commanding voice cut through the air, demanding silence. His thunderous rebuke reminded the four young fighters of their failure. Despite their combined effort, they had been unable to land a decisive blow. Some voiced their frustrations, blaming time and circumstance, while one, Tachi, remained silent, his displeasure showing only through a sharp click of his tongue. Cordry's four eyes narrowed in sharp judgment as he reprimanded the group, his words laced with disappointment. It was 4 against 1, and still Arthur had prevailed. His gaze then softened, however, when it turned to Arthur. The acknowledgement in the Asura's expression spoke volumes of Arthur's progress. Arthur, though nursing the sting in his wrist from the final block, carried himself with steady composure, as though the struggle had only made him stronger. It had been 4 months since his arrival in Epheotis, most of which had been consumed within the soul realm under relentless training. With the aid of the ether orb, those months had stretched into more than 3 years of rigorous combat tutelage under Cordry. To call it enjoyment would have been a lie. It had been grueling, unrelenting, and merciless, but the results spoke for themselves. 3 years of honing his body, sharpening his instincts, and refining his combat awareness had transformed him. His 14th birthday had passed in silence, but its mark was clear in the strength he now bore. Compared to his present self, his former combat ability felt clumsy, like the awkward steps of a toddler learning to walk. Arthur reflected on the time spent under Cordry's instruction. The Asura had guided him in refining his mana to better support his combat ability, though he had never passed down anything truly new. Whether it was due to the physiological differences between humans and Asura, Asuras, or because the Thyestes clan forbade the sharing of their unique mana arts with outsiders, Arthur never pressed for answers. Even without fully understanding what the Thyestes clan mana arts truly entailed, he appreciated how far he had come in physical combat under Cordry's watch. As the soul realm dimmed into darkness, Arthur opened his eyes and found himself back inside the familiar cave where his body had remained for the past year. He rose to his feet and expressed his gratitude, nodding respectfully toward the 4 novice children of the Thyestes clan who had also assisted him. Then he turned and bowed deeply toward his master. Arthur gave Cordry a sincere thanks for his guidance, to which the Asura responded with quiet satisfaction, admitting that the training had been a pleasure for him as well. Stretching his body to ease the stiffness of long training, Arthur turned to Winsome and inquired about the next stage of his journey. Winsome, however, hesitated. His gaze lingered on Arthur with a trace of curiosity, and his pause only deepened Arthur's confusion. He looked between the 2 Asuras, wondering if something was wrong. Cordry tilted his head, studying Arthur as if examining a strange and unfamiliar work of art. Winsome finally gave voice to their shared thought. Arthur had not changed. Arthur felt a rush of disbelief. His mana core had advanced into the latter levels of light yellow, nearly reaching an entire stage of progress. The idea that nothing had changed seemed absurd. Yet Winsome's expression grew firm as he explained. Training under the ether orb could indeed accelerate growth and offer tremendous benefits, but its prolonged use on someone still considered a child was forbidden. The discrepancy of time between the physical world and the soul realm could cause severe psychological displacement if the mind was not yet fully matured. Cordry admitted that even Lord Indrath and he had been hesitant to allow such training, yet with the impending war looming, there had been no choice. Winsome, however, noted with quiet observation that Arthur's demeanor, mentality, and very presence remained unchanged despite the 3 years of mental aging within the accelerated training. Unlike any ordinary child, Arthur had not displayed the shifts one would expect. Arthur, having lived a life far beyond his years, had long grown accustomed to presenting himself as mentally advanced. His time as a professor at Xyrus, instructing peers of his own age, had only reinforced that maturity. Winsome considered this an advantage, both for Arthur's training and for the war to come. He expressed gratitude to Cordry, acknowledging that even among the Asuras, few could match his mastery of close quarters combat. Cordry brushed aside the thanks. To him, Arthur's training was not a matter of gratitude, but of necessity, if Arthur was to have even the faintest chance against the Alacrian forces. Cordry pressed a firm hand on Arthur's shoulder, reminding him that the mages of Alacria were shaped by generations of guidance from Asuras, their mana arts far more advanced than anything seen in Dicathen. Confidence would be dangerous, for despite receiving extraordinary training, the restrictions of the pact bound the Asuras from intervening directly. To break it would risk a war that could end the world itself. Cordry reminded him that the burden of resistance fell upon Arthur and his peers. Arthur responded with a resolute nod before offering his farewell. As he left the cave alongside Winsome, he bowed respectfully to Cordry and the 4 other partners who had trained him relentlessly. The 2 departed, silence stretching between them until Winsome produced a set of parchments recently delivered by a messenger of Lord Indrath. Alder had written them, detailing the unfolding events in Dicathen. Arthur read through the words, realizing that the intelligence director Cynthia Goodsky had once provided was now being confirmed. The existence of the 4 scythes, formidable figures who led the enemy, was no longer rumor. These were to become his adversaries. But the parchments revealed more. Each scythe possessed a retainer, a personal subordinate of such terrifying ability that even a lance could be dispatched with ease. The horn fragment once collected from the dungeon where the lance Alea had fallen was confirmed by Goodsky to belong to a prime blood being of this retainer level. Worse still, there were 4 such individuals, standing as threats even greater than those scythes themselves. Arthur felt a sudden realization strike him as he remembered Director Goodsky's state. He thought she had been bound by restrictions that prevented her from revealing such information. Yet Winsome offered no reply, his silence heavy as he continued forward without looking back. Arthur's mind churned restlessly. The truth unraveled before him. Alea's killer had not been a scythe, but what they called a retainer. The scale of the impending war pressed upon him like a weight. 2 continents would clash, sending millions of soldiers to fight for their land. Dicathen, along with his family, was safe for now, but Arthur could not ignore the gnawing fear of how long that safety would last against the overwhelming might of the Vritra. He steeled himself, forcing away the doubt. At least now there was clarity. At least now he had a defined goal, an enemy to fight, a number to focus on. For the first time, Arthur had targets. Their steps brought them to the jagged edge of a towering cliff. Winsome finally broke his silence, his tone cold yet resolute as he revealed that this was to be Arthur's next training ground. Arthur peered down from the edge, unease coiling in his stomach. Winsome's words reminded him of the conditions laid out for this next phase of training. Arthur recalled them clearly. He was forbidden from using anything except the items stored in his bag, and he was not allowed to draw upon external mana arts. Winsome confirmed this with sharp certainty and pressed further, making sure Arthur understood the task he needed to complete. Arthur listed the requirements requirements allowed in his thoughts. The pelt of a raptor squirrel, the beast core of a silver panther, and the claws of a titan bear. These trophies, impossible as they sounded, were to serve as proof that he was ready to learn more about the mysterious will Sylvia had entrusted to him. But Winsome was not finished. With a calculated pause, he revealed yet another condition. From his hand, he produced a bell, large and heavy, fitting snugly into Arthur's palm. Winsome instructed him to keep it on him at all times. When Arthur managed to gather all the required items, he was to signal by breaking the bell. Before leaving, Winsome added one final piece of guidance, calmly recommending that Arthur collect the items in the order he had mentioned. Frustration flared in Arthur's chest. He could not stop himself from inwardly questioning Winsome's harsh and unforgiving methods. With no further words, Winsome vanished, leaving Arthur alone in the dense wilderness, burdened with nothing but the bell, a couple of blankets, and a leather pouch of water. Resigned yet determined, Arthur stepped forward. Without hesitation, he leapt from the cliff, plunging into the vast unknown where his grueling trial awaited. The raptor squirrel looked almost like any other squirrel, except with more prominent hind limbs, three thin tails, and sharp beady eyes. He tried lunging at them, but they slipped away, quick and untouchable. The cursed bell clung to him like a chain. It rang with every slight movement, mocking him, warning every creature around to keep their distance. His frustration spilled out louder than intended, but the forest only echoed back in silence. As the days stretched on, the futility gnawed at him. The bell wasn't the only thing betraying his presence. The raptor squirrels were more than just skittish prey. They were survivors at the very bottom of the food chain, honed by necessity. Their senses were sharper than he had imagined, keen enough to detect even the faint ripple of mana around him. Simply hiding was useless. Withdrawing the flow of mana from his body was dangerous. His body felt bare and unguarded in unfamiliar terrain, but it was the only way. He soon discovered that wasn't enough. Even without mana, intent itself bled into the air. Animals that lived in constant fear could sense killing intent as surely as scent or sound. If he wanted them close, he had to still his mind as well as his body. A glimpse through the brush confirmed it. The squirrels had returned, their tiny bodies darting as they foraged. But again, they slipped away like shadows. Catching them was easier in theory than in practice. Days passed, but trial after failure taught him. The first lesson, leaking purified mana, didn't drive them off entirely, but it spooked them just enough to make capture impossible. The second, internalizing mana inside his body worked better, leaving them unaware. But the moment his focus sharpened too much, intent bled out, scattering them instantly. And the third, perhaps the most useful discovery of all, was that external mana flow, released without hostility, did not disturb them in the slightest. Arthur stood in the center of a small clearing surrounded by thick vegetation. Before him lay a modest pile of mushrooms he had gathered, ones he had seen the raptor squirrels nibbling at during his observations. It was a crude attempt at bait, but one that might finally lure them within reach. He remembered the first time Sylvia had shown him mana rotation years ago, when every attempt had been clumsy and draining. Now, after relentless practice, the rotation came almost unconsciously, the rhythm steady and natural. With a perfect balance, he could release and circulate mana without even the most sensitive creature being able to sense it. Time blurred as he trained, his mind caught in repetition, until finally, when he opened his eyes yet again, movement caught his attention. There at the pile, several raptor squirrels nibbled cautiously at the mushrooms. A surge of triumph shot through him, his body tensing as excitement spilled over, but even the slight motion of celebration, the fist he pumped into the air, was enough to startle them. The bell rang mockingly at his side, and the squirrels vanished into the trees like smoke. Darkness crept over the forest, and with it came fatigue and the weight of frustration. The endless resupplying of mana into his core slowed his progress. Each attempt demanded so much, and he could barely move with the technique active. The bell added to the torment, its sharp ring constant, its presence inescapable. His mind wandered despite his efforts. Was Sylvie faring any better in her own training? What of his family? Tessia? Elijah? Worry pressed at him, but he smothered it quickly. Longing would do nothing for them. Training was the only path forward. Morning found him back in the clearing, body aching but determined. He pushed himself through the routine again, his thoughts sharpened into strategy. If he wanted to succeed, he would need bursts of movement, instantaneous and precise. He needed to pounce on the raptor squirrels before the bell betrayed him. He set the rule for himself, reached the tree before the bell chimes. To achieve that, he would need to use just enough mana to explode forward, while simultaneously camouflaging his presence by balancing atmospheric intake with the circulation of his own purified mana. Only then could he move undetected. Each attempt ended the same. The bell's mocking chime cut through the forest, halting him. He reset without complaint, walking back to the start, again and again. The word became a mantra, a command to himself. Cordry's lessons echoed in his memory. Controlling the flow of mana, suppressing or projecting presence was key to survival. To erase oneself using atmospheric mana to mask the faint trails of one's own energy, and then to lunge forward in an instant. This was more than stealth. It was a weapon. Perhaps this was what Winsome sought to test, this fine edge between concealment and eruption. Failure became routine, but each each failure carried progress. The tree came closer before the bell betrayed him. His speed sharpened, his control steadied, and with the passage of days, Arthur's frustration slowly hardened into resolve. From a distance, Winsome observed Arthur with calculating eyes. The deity wondered what the boy was planning. 2 weeks had already passed, and doubt crept in as he questioned whether he had placed too much faith in the child. Winsome had expected Arthur to have caught a raptor squirrel by now. These creatures, though gifted with tails capable of sensing even the faintest mana fluctuations or movements, were simple-minded. All Arthur needed to do was erase his presence, remain utterly still, and lure them with bait in his hands. Despite the delay, Winsome acknowledged that the boy had at least grasped the skill he had intended for him to learn. His gaze remained fixed, patience unwavering, as Arthur stood unmoving, waiting silently for the squirrel to draw near. Then, in the blink of an eye, Arthur's figure vanished from sight. A heartbeat later, he reappeared before the raptor squirrel, hand outstretched, and caught it with flawless precision. Awe silenced Winsome as realization struck him. Arthur had just taken his first step into Mirage Walk. For a mere human boy to grasp the fundamentals of a technique that formed the essence of the Thyestes clan's supremacy in physical combat was nothing short of astonishing. To achieve this simply by watching Cordry demonstrated an unthinkable level of perception. Winsome's mind reeled as he imagined what Arthur could become in the next 10 years, or perhaps even 5. Arthur, meanwhile, celebrated his small success inwardly. Relief flickered through him as he thought of how long he had struggled to reach this point. At last, he had lured out a far greater challenge, the Silver Panther, Claude. His eyes locked onto the sleek gray predator as it cautiously sniffed the air, edging closer to the raptor squirrels Arthur had carefully killed and placed as bait. Patiently, Arthur waited for his chance. The moment arrived. He propelled himself forward with explosive speed, faster than his old self would have ever believed possible. In an instant, he covered 20 feet, his augmented fist aimed directly at his elusive target. Yet, as always, Claude had already disappeared, vanishing before Arthur's attack could connect. His fist sank deep into the forest floor, the dirt yielding to his strength, but the Silver Panther was nowhere to be found. Frustration coursed through him. Once again, the beast had slipped through his grasp. Later, by a quiet stream, Arthur caught sight of his own reflection. His expression was sharp and worn, prompting him to sneer at himself inwardly. He splashed the cold water onto his face, cleansing both sweat and doubt. As the ripples faded, he gazed upward at the endless sky, a sigh escaping his lips. Hunger clawed at his stomach, forcing him to wonder when he had last eaten. Soon, his patience bore the sight of a raptor squirrel emerging cautiously from the undergrowth. Arthur readied himself, but before he could act, a black bird swooped in with precision. The squirrel leapt in panic, but the bird anticipated the movement, extending its talons mid-air to snatch the fleeing prey. In an instant, Arthur lost his meal to the predator, yet rather than wallowing in defeat, he found in sight an opportunity to learn from the hunt of another. Half an hour passed before another raptor squirrel revealed itself. Arthur sharpened his focus, waiting. The blur of black appeared again at the edge of his vision, the same bird diving with lethal grace. He held himself back. Not yet. The timing unfolded perfectly. Just as the squirrel leapt, the bird's talons opened to seize it. In that fleeting moment, Arthur surged forward, burst step propelling him with lightning speed. He closed the distance in an instant, his hand outstretched toward the bird's neck. A startled cry broke from the creature as its wings flapped violently. With desperate strength, it twisted free, slipping from Arthur's grasp. His hand closed on nothing but air, leaving him breathless with frustration. Arthur exhaled deeply, acknowledging that his burst step still required refinement. His mind drifted to the countless hours he had spent observing the birds. They were stealthy, swift, and precise hunters, yet even their speed could not rival that of a raptor. The clever creatures manipulated their prey, forcing a squirrel to flee in a direction of their choosing, only to intercept it at the perfect moment. As an uninvolved observer, Arthur had the advantage of foresight. He could see the bird before the squirrel did, and he could discern its intent before it struck, a privilege the prey never had. But his true challenge lay not with squirrels, but with the panthers. Claude, in particular, was far different from simple prey. The beast was intelligent, cunning enough to evade Arthur's attacks, but unwilling to face him head-on. This forced Arthur to reflect on the limitations of Mirage Walk. While its essence was to conceal mana and disorient the enemy, the technique still relied on the physical act of initiating that rapid step. Against squirrels, that momentary motion was negligible. But for Claude, it was enough to anticipate and evade. Arthur's thoughts sharpened. What if he could eliminate that motion entirely? What if he could shorten the process so much that it appeared as though he had truly teleported? If he achieved that, he might even be able to feint Claude himself. Memories from his past life surfaced. He recalled how the human body functioned as a complex system of opposing forces, each muscle working in tandem with its counterpart. The biceps contracted to curl the arm, while the triceps extended it. The abdominal muscles engaged with every forward step, and the calves, small yet powerful, were vital in propelling the body as each foot pressed off the ground. Movement was never the work of one muscle, but of many, operating in precise coordination. The knowledge he once thought irrelevant now revealed its worth. Arthur had been refining his mastery of mana, pushing it into his body with meticulous precision. He focused on channeling energy into specific muscles in a deliberate sequence, forcing his body into motion without any outward movement. With perfect timing and control, this would allow him to replicate the illusion of motion, Mirage Walk, without needing to actually step. If executed flawlessly, it would be something beyond even Cordry's reach, the ability to perform the technique from a completely stationary stance. His determination burned as he urged himself onward, questioning how much longer he would spend chasing wild beasts in the forest for practice. Finding prey near camp had grown increasingly difficult, each hunt pushing him deeper into the wilderness. This time, however, something was different. The forest had fallen into an unsettling hush. Letting Mirage Walk fade, Arthur infused mana into his ears, sharpening his senses. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, a low growl reached him. His instincts sharpened. Carefully, he crept closer, cloaking his presence, pressing himself low behind the thick shrubs edging a cliff. There, two silver panthers clashed, a rare territorial battle, explaining the eerie emptiness of the woods. The larger beast lunged first, snarling viciously, claws raised high. The smaller, quicker one, clawed, slipped aside with fluid grace, countering with snapping jaws. The two predators blurred together in a violent storm of teeth and claws. Each strike answered with a dodge. Each dodge met with a ruthless counter. Their duel was raw survival, savage and unyielding. Arthur's eyes followed their deadly dance, entranced, until he realized the forest had grown unnaturally silent around them. Claude noticed too. His fur bristled, instinct screaming. In the midst of his advantage, the panther abruptly broke away, fleeing into the shadows with startling urgency. Arthur frowned. Victory had been within Claude's grasp, yet he abandoned the fight. Something unseen was at play, though Arthur could sense nothing nearby. Turning his attention to the wounded survivor, Arthur's mind sharpened with resolve. This was his moment. The larger silver panther had spotted him, growling low, its body sinking into a defensive crouch. With calculated intent, Arthur executed burst step from his position, the fake step serving as a flawless feint. His surroundings blurred as his focus narrowed solely on the wounded mana beast. Surging forward, he lunged, channeling mana into his grip as his hands clamped tightly around the beast's neck, determined not to let it escape. But just as victory seemed certain, the panther jerked violently. In the next instant, Arthur found himself being dragged into the abyss, plummeting down a steep gorge with the thrashing creature. Suppressing a string of curses, Arthur steadied himself on the back of the unconscious beast. His body shifted into balance as mana surged through his legs. He knew Winsome would understand his decision as he unleashed Typhon's Howl. A devastating blast of wind erupted downward, screeching through the ravine as it tore against the earth below. The deafening force broke his fall, slowing his descent until he landed in the heart of the spell's destruction. Dust erupted in thick clouds, shrouding his vision and choking the air. Covering his mouth and nose, Arthur pushed forward cautiously through the haze. Then the world trembled. A roar shattered the air, reverberating with such raw power that his chest tightened. The thunderous cry gave way to rhythmic stomps, each one shaking the ground beneath him. The weight of the approaching creature's presence staggered him, leaving Arthur momentarily speechless. Emerging from the haze was not the towering beast he had imagined, but something far smaller, barely 3 feet tall. It carried the form of a titan bear, yet it was only a fraction of the size he expected. To Arthur's astonishment, it even spoke. He quickly reasoned it must be a cub, not the full-grown monster he had feared. If that were true, then what stood before him was not a threat, but perhaps an unexpected opportunity. The titan bear regarded the lifeless panther sprawled before him, but his predatory gaze quickly shifted back to Arthur. The beast's lips curled as he licked them, his hunger evident. Arthur understood then that there was no escaping the confrontation. He would have to fight. Lowering his stance, he braced himself, expecting the bear to charge with brute force. Instead, the mana beast remained rooted in place, its paw suddenly thrust forward. Arthur's body was hurled backward as if struck by an invisible cannon. The titan bear snorted, amused by the resistance of its prey, calling Arthur a tougher meal than expected. Then the attacks came, not with sheer physicality, but through strange bursts of long-range power. Arthur responded instantly, activating Mirage Walk and chaining it with Burst Step. Yet even with his speed, he felt a sudden stab of pain tearing through his leg. Looking down mid-movement, he saw fresh blood gushing from a deep gash carved into his left thigh. The bear's growl demanded he stop fleeing. Its massive paw carved through the air again, and Arthur dropped low to the ground, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. But even in evasion, the beast's claws grazed his chest, raking across flesh and spilling more blood. Desperation took over as Arthur flung himself aside, but he wasn't quick enough. Another spell slammed into his ribs with brutal force, the impact shattering bone and leaving him gasping. Before he could recover, another swipe of the paw followed instantly, sending a second wave of mana tearing into him. The force lifted his body like a rag doll and smashed him against the wall. 4 deep, bloody gashes ripped across his chest just below his collarbone, and fresh blood sprayed from the wounds. Arthur stifled his scream, his breath ragged as fire licked through his nerves. His ribs throbbed, his chest burned, and the truth hit him with bone-deep clarity. clarity. This wasn't the soul realm. If he fell here, it would be his end. The Titan bear advanced with a look of impatience, eager to finish what he had started. Without hesitation, the beast thrust its paw forward once again, releasing another devastating attack. Arthur reacted in desperation, kicking up a cloud of dust to obscure himself. A suffocating pulse of pressure rolled outward from the Titan beast, crushing down on Arthur like the weight of the earth itself. Arthur forced himself to stop fleeing, raising his hands as if surrendering, but his mind was already racing. The Titan bear swiped its paw again, releasing another slicing strike that tore through the air. Pain surged through Arthur as he endured the attack, yet he clenched his teeth and executed the modified burst step he had been refining. The wound on his left leg tore wider, blood spilling faster under the sudden strain. His body screamed that it could not take much more. He knew he had to end this fight immediately. He had survived 2 lifetimes. He refused to let it all end in a forgotten ravine at the claws of a beast. The Titan bear roared in fury and thundered toward him. Arthur triggered burst, his vision blurring as his body accelerated sharply to the right. The bell rang out, betraying his position, and the Titan bear's attention snapped toward the sound. Its paw lashed out, cleaving the bell cleanly in two, but Arthur had already closed the distance. The massive beast faltered for an instant, its dark eyes widening in shock as Arthur appeared beside it. Mana surged into Arthur's fist, glowing faintly under the strain of his concentration. He drove the strike into the bear's stomach with crushing force. The impact echoed in the gorge, and the Titan bear's body was hurled across the ravine, smashing violently into the rocky cliff wall. Arthur's legs finally gave out. Drained of all strength, he collapsed to the ground, his cheek pressing against the cold earth as numbness spread through him. Far above, the broken bell had already delivered its signal. Winsome arrived at the gorge, his sharp gaze sweeping across the battlefield. He immediately took in the scene. A silver panther sprawled lifeless, the ground beneath it soaked with blood. Winsome's frown deepened as his gaze lingered on the battered boy sprawled amidst the carnage. Confusion clouded his thoughts. Why had the child ventured so deep into such a dangerous place? The battlefield around them spoke only of desperation and violence, yet it revealed nothing of the answers he sought. Without wasting time, Winsome began treating Arthur's injuries. His sharp eyes traced the damage. At least 3 broken ribs, countless deep gashes carved across the boy's chest, and legs that bore signs of internal bleeding. The devastation was shocking, almost unfathomable. No ordinary mana beast could have inflicted such harm. Even a fully grown Titan bear, standing 10 feet tall, would have struggled to leave Arthur in this state. A chilling thought struck him, and as his suspicion grew, his attention shifted toward the slain Titan bear cub. Its lifeless body twitched unnaturally. Suddenly, its stomach convulsed, swelling grotesquely before a black tentacle burst forth, writhing violently. The parasite thrashed for a moment, then collapsed into stillness, leaving only a foul aura in its wake. Recognition hardened Winsome's expression. It was a demon leech, a rare and abhorrent parasite. Its insidious ability to possess a host and strengthen its core beyond natural limits made it a terror that even the Asuras regarded with caution. Winsome recalled with distaste how Agrona had once experimented on such creatures to develop the strengthening serum unleashed upon Dicathen during the Xyrus attack. With cold efficiency, he pried the demon leech from the cub's corpse and crushed it in his palm, ending its wretched existence. His thoughts lingered on the boy once more. Was it cruel misfortune or bitter irony that Arthur had encountered a cub possessed by such a parasite? Yet, what unsettled Winsome more was the realization that the boy had managed to defeat it. Winsome retrieved a white orb, refined within the bear's body by the parasite, the rare essence, and returned to Arthur's side. Kneeling, he gently placed the orb into the boy's mouth. Inwardly, he acknowledged the boy's perseverance. Arthur's trials had been punishing, but they had yielded a reward of extraordinary value. Even before Arthur opened his eyes, he became aware of the soft creaking of footsteps moving across old wooden floors. Horror struck him when he tried to move, only to realize there was no response from his legs. From the waist down, he felt nothing, no sensation, no feedback. With urgency, he lifted the blanket covering his lower body, only to discover his legs tightly wrapped in bandages and secured to a wooden splint. A gentle but brittle voice drew his attention, assuring him that his legs were fine, though numbed to spare him from unbearable pain. Turning toward the source, Arthur saw a woman well past her youth, her expression soft, her smile carrying a quiet tenderness. Arthur's mind swirled with confusion and worry as he tried to confirm where he was. The woman introduced herself as Meyer and explained that they were still in Epheotis. She admitted that using healing mana arts might have been faster, but such a method would have caused his bones to heal into unnatural shapes. Instead, she had spent hours knitting his broken legs back into something resembling functional limbs. It had only been 2 days since the incident, but the effort had already left Arthur horrified by how much time had slipped by. Stern but kind, kind, Meyer warned him not to attempt rising that night. Rest was his greatest priority now. Grateful for her care and hospitality, Arthur expressed his thanks with all the sincerity he could muster. Meyer accepted his words lightly, remarking that she did not treat just anyone. Yet in Arthur's case, curiosity had compelled her. She wanted to meet the human boy who, according to whispers, was destined to become the savior of the world. Meyer left Arthur alone with his thoughts, the flames in the fireplace twisting and writhing as the only source of light in the room. It felt as though his eyes had only closed for a second, yet sharp stabbing pain coursed through his body and wrenched him awake. Abandoning any hope of returning to sleep, Arthur forced himself upright. In his fragile state, the only thing he could do productively was to meditate. He focused inward, letting his mind descend to the mana core swirling deep within his sternum. The moment he concentrated, a surge of unfamiliar energy rose to meet him. What once felt like an insurmountable mountain blocking his advancement to the silver core stage suddenly became a flattened plain, as if a path had been rolled open before him. The untamed energy inside his body continued striking against his core, layer by layer, brightening the silver glow within him until it shimmered more brilliantly with every influx of power. Just as he believed the transformation was complete, a sharp metallic ringing tore through his ears. It was as though an unseen barrier holding back his mind collapsed, and in an instant, his body was thrust into the second phase of Sylvia's dragon will. Arthur pried his eyes open and saw golden runes crawl across his arms and shoulders, glowing with vibrant intensity. To his astonishment, the markings shifted and reshaped themselves, growing more intricate as they arranged into the form of an ancient language. In the past, whenever he had invoked Dragon's Awakening, Arthur had only ever glimpsed 4 distinct colors, each tied to an element, but now, specks of radiant purple joined the array of blue, yellow, red, and green, swirling together with undeniable brilliance. Arthur turned at the sound of movement and found Meyer standing in the entryway, her gaze fixed on him. There was solemnity in her eyes, but also a hint of sentiment as she whispered that the truth had been confirmed. He had inherited Realm Heart. She explained that the glowing purple iris and the runes etched across his body were undeniable signs, physical manifestations of Sylvia's power. The Realm Heart physique was an ability said to belong only to the bloodline of Indrath. Her voice softened as she asked if he had been able to perceive all 5 of the colors that made up the physical realm. Arthur, still catching his breath, managed a small nod. Meyer began to explain with a solemn tone that the Realm Heart physique had been named by the ancestors of the Indrath clan. In this heightened state, the wielder's atonement with the physical realm became unparalleled. Although the ability itself did not directly grant strength, the activation of Realm Heart bestowed knowledge and insight beyond the reach of those without it. Meyer emphasized that in this case, knowledge was the truest form of power. Arthur reflected on his own experience with the second phase of Realm Heart. The last time he had used it, he had only been able to see 4 colors. He questioned why only now he was able to perceive the faint purple particles and wondered if this was one of the secrets deliberately kept hidden from lesser beings like himself. Meyer acknowledged the truth of his suspicion. She admitted that the Asuras were prideful and secretive, often greedy with the knowledge they possessed, with the Indrath clan being the most notorious in that regard. Although she herself was no exception to such tendencies, time and countless experiences had dulled her concern for such trivial pride. She revealed that she was willing to teach Arthur a few things and gently suggested they take a stroll. She guided him out on a wheelchair to a serene location, and Arthur found himself mesmerized by the breathtaking sight before him. The air was alive with mana, and countless creatures thrived in this fertile part of Epheotis. Meyer gazed upon the scenery and remarked on its beauty, pointing out how the creatures flourished thanks to the abundance of raw mana in the area. She asked if he could feel it as well. Arthur quietly nodded, the sensation of the surrounding energy undeniable as it coursed through the land and into him. Meyer explained patiently. She told Arthur that it was not natural for lesser beings or even asuras to directly manipulate raw mana. The same truth applied to all living creatures, including mana beasts. She described how mages with an affinity for a certain element always had a much easier time absorbing atmospheric mana of that same type. To illustrate her point, Meyer gestured toward a fire blig. Despite being surrounded by all forms of mana in the world, the creature naturally absorbed only the mana particles its body was most attuned to. Mages functioned in the same way. To someone possessing the Realm Heart physique, a fire affinity mage might appear to be absorbing only the red mana particles, yet when the refining process was completed, the resulting mana would appear white upon its first use. She then explained what happened when the mage's affinity was different. If a mage held a natural affinity for water, then during the refining of raw mana, their body would inevitably absorb a disproportionately larger amount of water elemental particles compared to others. As the mage refined these particles, their very body and mind were altered, predisposed toward water, gaining sharper insights and instinctive control over the element. Meyer contrasted this with practical use. Such a water affinity mage, if attempting to conjure a fireball, would struggle immensely. They would need to concentrate on its shape, its proportion, its density, and even the speed of its release. But when it came to water, the same mage would would act with fluid ease, able to raise a stream, split it into multiple orbs, and send them flying toward an enemy with nothing more than a flick of the wrist. Turning to Arthur, she asked him why this phenomenon occurred. Arthur, thinking carefully, concluded that it was because of the overwhelming influence of absorbing a majority of one element during the refining process. Meyer gave him an approving nod, acknowledging that he was correct. She elaborated that constant exposure to a single element would, without doubt, provide insights that surfaced during meditation, further deepening the mage's natural mastery. As their lesson continued, Meyer walked Arthur toward a table where herbal tonics had been prepared. She poured them gently before shifting the conversation. Her eyes sharpened as she asked Arthur what he knew of ether. Arthur admitted that his knowledge was limited, but he did know one truth: that ether was capable of manipulating time. Meyer patiently explained that ether was fundamentally different from mana, a truth so evident that even the simplest of minds could grasp it. She described how both ether and mana made up the world they lived in, yet functioned in entirely different ways. Some speculated that ether formed the very building blocks of existence, while mana gave life and sustenance to those structures. To make it clearer, Meyer likened ether to a cup and mana to the water within it. It was easy to manipulate the water inside without disturbing the cup, but reshaping the cup itself without shattering it was far more difficult. Even the Indrath clan, revered as the most adept in wielding ether, had no concrete theory to justify their mastery. What set them apart was their unique ability to physically detect ether through the realm heart physique. To those bound to the physical realm, ether remained intangible, a hidden law holding the world together, much like glass contained water. Without such vision, it was impossible for mortals to fathom the boundaries that preserved order in creation. Arthur's thoughts drifted back to the strange purple particles he had seen while activating Realm Heart, and Meyer confirmed that what he had witnessed was indeed ether. She explained that Realm Heart allowed him to peer beyond the surface, to see the glass cup that held the water from within, the very framework of the world. With mana, the extent of control was tied to the capacity of one's core, dictating how much of the water could be moved. But with ether, influence stretched to the cup itself, enabling manipulation of the boundaries of reality. Arthur nodded, carefully absorbing her words, and Meyer continued. She revealed that ether was composed of three profound aspects: Avum, the control over time; Spatium, the authority over space; and Vivum, the influence over all living components. No matter how powerful, insightful, or fortunate a practitioner might be, mastery was limited to only one of these paths. Over generations, however, the Asuras had discovered a method to discern where their aptitude lay, a discovery that allowed them to align with their destined aspect of Aether. Arthur had reached the peak of his curiosity, desperate for answers. Meyer finally revealed the truth: runes that manifested when one invoked Realm Heart. Closing her eyes, she released a pressure so heavy that Arthur instinctively braced himself. Golden runes unfurled down her bare arm, not sharp and intricate like his, but flowing gracefully, resembling the branches of an elven tree or rivers intertwining in harmony. Her eyes opened, glowing with radiant lavender light, as she explained through her presence and aura that these markings represented her path. Vivum, the influence of life itself, the source of the healing she had granted him. Though her aura was intimidating, her tone carried a gentle weight as she urged him to do the same. Arthur obeyed, activating Realm Heart. A chilling surge burst from his mana core, liquid frost racing violently through his veins in search of escape. Golden runes flared to life across his arms, burning with heat against his frozen flesh. Meyer observed intently, fascinated by the unique structure of his runes. Testing a suspicion, Arthur conjured a small ember at his fingertip. Immediately, the particles in the air reacted, the red specks stirring at his command. He experimented further, weaving spells of various elements, watching the ambient particles shift and respond, save for the purple ones that remained untouched. Meyer's presence pressed into his thoughts, almost amused at his attempts. She reminded him, through her very aura and wisdom, that Realm Heart was not a human's tool of manipulation, but a perception, an unveiling of what remained unseen. Ether, she revealed, was fundamentally unlike mana. Mana could be molded, drunk, and expelled like water, but ether was the cup itself, the vessel of existence. To attempt bending it as one would bend mana was nothing short of foolishness. Arthur understood then that the particles surrounding him were not meant to be controlled, but recognized. Ether, omnipresent and unyielding, bound both him and Meyer within its laws. And through the Vivum path, Meyer had wielded that truth to restore his shattered legs, piecing life back into broken flesh with the force of existence itself. Arthur questioned how ether had gathered in Meyer's hand, how it had formed into Vivum, and how it had healed his legs. Meyer, calm and patient, told him not to rush. She explained that after discovering her affinity with the branch of life, she had studied Vivum for centuries. Yet even with that vast knowledge, she still felt uncertain about being able to fully explain what he truly wished to know. Arthur, unwilling to give up, pressed her, making his desire to learn clear. Meyer relented. She revealed that unlike mana, ether could not be absorbed. One merely altered its presence and influence upon reality. Arthur tried to piece it together and asked whether that meant a core was unnecessary to influence ether. Meyer clarified that an individual's core was what connected the body to the physical realm. While ether was not directly manipulated in the same manner as mana, the mana core remained crucial. She assured him that when the time came, he would realize his path, but for now, she would not overwhelm him at the beginning stages of cultivation. What mattered was understanding that eventually, cultivation would no longer depend on the simple refinement of manhwa, but on attaining insights into truths that could never be directly passed down. She then observed that his ability, limited though it was, to utilize ether was not mere chance. There was a reason behind it, one that was more than coincidence. She asked him to think on it. Arthur assumed it was because of Sylvia's will, but Meyer shook her head. That was only part of the reason. Sylvia's will allowed him to bear the burden of ether, but it was not the source of his ability to manipulate it. Arthur's thoughts raced, and then realization struck, his ability to wield all four elements. Meyer chuckled warmly, affirming his insight. It was mastery over the four fundamental elements that had granted the perspective to look beyond them and glimpse the greater truth, the awareness of the glass cup that contained the water. As Arthur processed this, his hands began to tremble. Meyer noticed and gently urged him to release Realm Heart. She acknowledged how impressive it was that he had lasted so long. Arthur felt the world regain its natural hues as he released Realm Heart. He turned to Meyer, his thoughts heavy with anticipation. He wanted to know which quality of ether he was most attuned to. Yet, Meyer's expression carried the weight of caution. She explained that while Arthur possessed the rare ability to manipulate all four elements, carried the will of a dragon, and bore the Realm Heart physique, he was still bound by the limitations of being human. She warned him that unlike her kind, she could not predict whether he would ever be able to consciously control ether in the same way. Arthur tried to mask his emotions, but the sting of disappointment was undeniable. The hope of certainty was slipping away. Still, Meyer pressed on. She admitted she could not explain why Arthur was able to manipulate time, but was certain he was never meant to follow the path of Avum. With deliberate care, she pulled out a parchment and a pen, her hand gliding across the page as she inscribed intricate symbols. Her explanation deepened as she reminded Arthur of his struggles with ether manipulation, even with Sylvie's will guiding him. Unlike others, his path had always been different. Like Sylvia, he was not destined to walk the road of mere elemental or temporal control. Instead, he was meant to grasp something far greater, the very fabric of the boundaries holding the physical realm together. When she handed him the parchment, her words gave form to the revelation. Arthur belonged to the genus of Spatium. Arthur's mind raced at the weight of it. Even with this knowledge, his heart was unsettled. He recognized that despite his qualifications, there was still no certainty he could consciously wield this overwhelming ability. His human body, fragile compared to the might of dragons and asuras, might crumble beneath the burden. Yet he pleaded inwardly, longing for guidance, desperate to understand what steps he must take to master this grand power instead of being consumed by it. Meyer placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder, her voice carrying both pity and gravity. She acknowledged the overwhelming potential within him, yet lamented that his capacity was restrained by something beyond his control. Her words were not meant to mock him, but to remind him that the ability he possessed, knowledge, was an immeasurable strength. With it, he might one day find a way to surpass the boundaries of his birth, something even the Asuras themselves had yet to accomplish. She admitted that in sharing such truths with him, she had already broken many rules, for this knowledge could become a weapon against the dragon race if it ever fell into the wrong hands. Yet she insisted that her intentions were genuine, and that she truly wanted the best for him. Even if Realm Heart could not be wielded to its fullest, its sensory abilities alone made it an incomparable asset in the battles to come. Combined with his mastery over all four elements and his remarkable combat talent, Arthur already carried with him more tools than most could dream of. Arthur tried to speak, but she silenced him with a grim warning. The movement technique he had created, the very one that had dragged him into her home in such a battered state, was too dangerous. She forbade him from ever using it again. Her words left Arthur in stunned silence. Weeks of relentless training, all the refinement he had poured into burst steps, suddenly meant nothing. When she asked about Mirage Walk, she seemed almost surprised that he had managed to create it on his own. Arthur hoped that explaining its mechanics might convince her to reconsider, but her judgment did not waver. The technique was dangerous, too dangerous to ever use again. Though his breakthrough into the Silver Core stage had been a welcome surprise, and though his combat against Cordry placed him comfortably in the AA class as an adventurer even without elemental magic, his progress in the mana arts now felt stagnant. Mirage Walk had been his only true creation, and now it was stripped away from him. Meanwhile, Alakria was home to true Asuras, beings whose manipulation of mana far surpassed anything he could imagine. From Winsome's reports, Arthur knew that even a single retainer possessed the strength to annihilate a squad led by a lance. Meyer had said that knowledge was power, but Arthur could not shake the bitter truth pressing at his heart. Knowledge alone would not be enough to defeat Alakria. As the darkness faded into light and the sound of birds marked the rise of the sun, Arthur stepped out of his cottage and found Elder Meyer waiting outside. She observed him with knowing eyes, remarking on the toll the previous night had taken on him, a consequence she had expected from his use of Vivum. Arthur admitted that the pain had been worse than when his legs were once shattered, though he was grateful that at least he could walk again. Meyer acknowledged his recovery with calm satisfaction, explaining that she had requested time with him from Winsome. That time, she said, could be brief or extended, depending on what Arthur managed to accomplish. She wished to impart some of her knowledge and guide him onto the right path, though she reminded him that he was still human, and that the people of Dicathen lagged far behind in their understanding of mana. With that, she instructed him to consider every spell he knew, combine them however he wished, and attack her with his full strength. Arthur gathered mana into his palms, preparing to cast. Yet before he could release his intended spell, Meyer effortlessly unveiled his plan. She pointed out the compressed sphere of water forming in his right hand, and the gust of wind prepared in his left. Her words carried a light reprimand, reminding him that she had told him to strike her with everything he had, not something so trivial. Refusing to be discouraged by her taunt, Arthur released the spells anyway, and quickly shifted his focus to the ground beneath her feet, intending to rupture it and catch her off guard. But Meyer, without the faintest sign of effort, commented on his strategy, calling it clever yet unnecessary, since she would prefer not to see the grass ruined. With casual grace, she evaded both the wind and water attacks, leaving Arthur stunned for a moment before he steadied himself. She winked knowingly, reminding him that this ability was something he already possessed. She was merely nudging him in the right direction. Days soon blurred into weeks, as Arthur trained under Elder Meyer's relentless guidance. Her methods pushed him far beyond comfort, as she constantly reminded him of the importance of interpreting mana fluctuations and detecting spells before they manifested fully in the physical realm. Each session tested his awareness and instincts, and her reprimands sharpened his senses. Yet Arthur couldn't help but voice his frustration at her ruthless training, pointing out how she seemed to use her healing arts as an excuse to repeatedly injure him in severe ways. Meyer guided Arthur patiently, her tone sharp but instructive, as she explained that proper interpretation of mana fluctuations began with sensing spells at the moment they touched the physical realm. From there, Realm Heart had to be used precisely to determine the form each spell would take. Arthur, battered but enduring, couldn't help but wonder aloud why she hadn't simply replaced his ruined legs in the past if healing came so easily to her. Meyer's expression hardened as she reminded him that the use of ether beyond a threshold always carried costs. Though it was possible to restore even the gravest wounds, such restoration demanded extracting the very ether sustaining another life, a price too great to casually pay. Arthur gritted his teeth, weary from her relentless strikes, and muttered his frustration at her continued assault. Meyer only laughed, teasing that it would be easier if he stopped falling for her feints. She warned him that true combat was never so simple. An opponent's voice could be a deception, their words merely a mask, while it was their imagination that shaped the size, strength, and duration of the spell. Enemies could project to trick their foes, or cast without words altogether. 6 weeks had passed in this cycle of merciless training. Morning after morning, Meyer would hurl spells into the air or directly at Arthur, forcing him to hone his perception of mana and strengthen Realm Heart. His endurance had grown, the duration of his ability stretching longer than before, though never by much. Still, his impatience remained. He lamented his slow progress, convinced that by now he should have mastered the art. Meyer corrected him sharply, pointing out his tendency to anticipate spells before they had truly manifested. Arthur steadied himself, determination in his gaze, and demanded they begin again. This time, when Meyer attacked, Arthur responded with precision. Wind bullets surged forward, breaking apart her magic. Meyer's eyes gleamed with approval, impressed by his advancement, yet she pressed harder. She conjured an earthen spear, jagged shards bursting from the ground with violent force. Arthur retaliated instantly, unleashing a wave of fire that reduced the stones to dust. But one shard escaped his control, cutting through the air with lethal intent. Arthur braced himself, yet before the attack could strike, a hand swept past him and caught the shard mid-flight with effortless grace. It was Winsome. Winsome's expression hardened as he announced that time had run out for Arthur's current training. With a respectful bow toward Meyer, he sought permission to intrude. Meyer's calm acknowledgement revealed the subtle weight of her presence. Though Arthur had already suspected she held influence within the Indrath clan, her immense power and the fact that she had sheltered him made that much clear. It was startling to see even Winsome bow before her. That small gesture spoke volumes of her true standing. Winsome explained that his visit was not by chance. Lord Indrath himself had already arranged Arthur's next instructor, one who was waiting impatiently for his new student. Meyer accepted this without resistance, though she made it clear she would continue to keep watch over Arthur's growth. Winsome, without hesitation, assured her that such visits would not be a problem. Turning her attention back to Arthur, Meyer reminded him of the lessons she had imparted regarding the world around him. She expected his mastery of Realm Heart to continue. Arthur, resolute, promised himself he would meet that expectation before their next encounter. With their goodbyes exchanged, Arthur stepped out of the cottage with Winsome. The forest canopy above filtered the light as they wove through the thick cluster of trees. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.